Oh, one more thing. Just tell me when to turn to the next slides, folks. Just say next slide.
Oh, okay, sure. So I'll begin then. Well, I'll begin first by, I have to turn and look at my slides. All right, my lab program or unit is supposed to be designed over about 3 weeks for 8th graders because I'm dealing with 8th grade students, urban students, and this is their first time developing their own lab report, kind of doing this inductive approach. They haven't really had the opportunity in past schools to work with this, and they haven't really had the opportunity at current middle school now. So what I'll be doing is I'll first be introducing them with this problem with 2 different plants like that are very different in their height and their number of leaves, and present them with this challenge and say, you know, we know a little bit about plants, but we need to figure out what's going on. And so how are we going to be able to do that? And then the first couple of days, the first class will be going on to thinking about the factors that change and influence plant growth. So that's our primary question. And you can do next slide. All right, so the challenges, some of my biggest challenges I think about as I'm presenting this unit to the students is kind of all center around the fact that they haven't seen a lot of this vocabulary yet, and they haven't really designed their own experiment yet. So I have to spend a great deal of time. I've carved out 3 weeks to explicitly teach all these terms like independent and dependent variable, and then practice with them before we can design our own experiment. Thinking about controls and reflecting on what our measurements should be to be appropriate, and overall I have to make sure that I take the time to model and explicitly communicate what all of these parts of the scientific method are, because they won't be able to dive into it in this open-ended way with the correct tools otherwise. So my goal is to give them the tools without giving them this like shopping list or procedural lab. So I essentially have to design like a parallel example lab that we work on together that mirrors what they'll be doing on their own independently on alternating days. Next slide. So I'll give them the choice of what data to collect. Ultimately, I'm going to try to guide them towards choosing between 3 things, such as plant mass, plant height, or a number of leaves. And we'll spend, in the days leading up to that, we'll spend days practicing building our own charts and graphs with particular amounts of data and answering questions where they'll be brainstorming what characteristic of a plant or characteristic of a lab report would be most appropriate to measure, so that when we finally arrive at our plants a few days after planting the seeds and there's something to measure, they will know what would be the most appropriate way to label their charts and their graphs and what data to collect. And hopefully it'll give them the feeling of autonomy as 8th graders going into high school, that they can choose what they're measuring depending on their group. Next slide. I think that might be it.
I think you just have the 2, and your time's just about up anyway, so that would be perfect if you just wrapped it up.
I'm all set. I think overall what I'm trying to do is like mirror the appropriate lab method for the students before they kind of dive in on their own. That's it. Any questions? Oh yeah, that was a solubility lab, so it was a little different, but I try to model some of the same things there.
Okay, well, I think you've left them speechless. I think we'll find that Erin can report back to us about some real students. And so we did get a chance to look at her class, at least the back of their heads, and see some of how she works with them. And Erin did bring this into our micro-teaching class. And so, all right, when will you actually run this? Okay, well, it'll be interesting to see, just as the weather's starting to get better, so hopefully they'll be looking outdoors too. So maybe you could tell us more later when you've actually done some of the work. Yes, we will definitely want to hear about this and see what they figure out. And while thank you, Erin, and I think, let me see, who's next on stage? Okay, it's Laura. And let's see how good you guys are at getting up on stage. Good. Better than I am. I will pull over slides. Just tell me when you want me to change slides. It might take a second, but we're not going to be going too long on any of this. These are just highlights. Don't forget, I'll be sending you out materials where you can do some judgment based on the rather short amount of time you're able to hear these, but I think we'll still be able to evaluate each other and to be thinking about things you want to look for as you're preparing for your own presentations. So thank you, Laura. I'll turn off my mic now and just tell me when to change the slides.
Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. So I'm currently a chemistry teacher in a high school setting for 10th and 11th graders. So I chose to focus on the section on solutions. So you can change the slide. Okay, so I did a bunch of things to kind of keep the experience engaging and a lot of hands-on things for my students. They have to learn the like dissolves like rule, which states that a solute will dissolve in a substance that is similar to itself. So I do this t-shirt chromatography activity where they draw on a t-shirt with permanent markers, and then we take a similar substance like alcohol to drop on the shirt, and then it dissolves the marker, and it kind of spreads out in a cool tie-dye design. Yeah, they love it. They're like, ooh, it's fun for them. And then they have kind of contests to see who has the best shirt. They also learn about different effects on solubility, temperature, pressure. So I have them experiment with soda. They taste warm soda, cold soda, soda that had the cap off, and they kind of see when it was most bubbly, meaning when the most gas has been dissolved. Different types of solutions we learn about: saturated, unsaturated, and supersaturated, and we'll actually create those hands-on with rock candy and Kool-Aid. We do a Molarity Lab, which I'll talk about next. And we also learn about freezing point depression, where if you add a salt to water, it'll lower the freezing point, and we make ice cream with that, which is fun. It's messy, but it's fun. We take half and half in one bag, and then we'll place it in a bag of ice, and we'll actually add salt to the ice so it lowers the freezing point enough to, thank you, to freeze the half and half and turn it into ice cream. And they get to experiment with their own recipe. They can add more sugar, less sugar, and see what happens. So it's really fun, and the kids seem to really enjoy that one. Slide, please. Okay, so the lab I chose to focus on was a Molarity Lab, and their assignment was to make 3 solutions, 0.1, 0.4, and 0.7 molar of Kool-Aid, and then they get to taste it and decide which is best. And I don't give them a procedure, I just kind of give them a pre-lab worksheet to get them started thinking. The molarity equation has moles and volume in it, but you can't measure moles directly in the lab, so they'll start talking about it. And they'll think like, hey, what can I measure in the lab? I can measure mass with a balance. And then they'll think about how to convert moles to mass, which we had learned previously. And they'll think about what equipment to use, the balance, the graduated cylinder. And then as they're creating their own procedure, they'll make their own data table that goes along with it. Hey, I need to measure mass. Okay, I'll make a column for mass, and things like that. And then finally, they love to do graphs. Not really, but I make them. I have an engineering background, so I'm really big on having my students manipulate equations and see the relationship between math and science. So I'll get them to put the equation in the form y equals mx plus b. And so with the molarity equation,
If they rearrange it, they'll get moles equals volume times molarity. And if they graph moles versus molarity, they'll notice that the slope is the volume because the V is where the M should be. And they'll notice that there's no plus B in the equation, so the y-intercept is 0. And they'll actually get a trend line on Excel, and they can see this equation themselves. So that's my lab, and I just try to get them started thinking like little engineers and scientists. Thank you, guys.
I don't know if any of you have found the clapping gesture. I can't find them fast enough, but you do have gestures. And I was going to try to dance when everybody was about finished, but you finished up in time. I like the fact, here's another real world theme, using food. Laura's been using that food in her theme, and she's getting the students thinking. But a problem with chemistry is people tend to not see where it is. And when you get into applications of chemistry, then people start to realize it isn't as much a foreign language, it's right around them. So very nice job. Any questions for Laura before she leaves us? Okay, Laura, I think you've answered all their questions. We'll be doing more interacting online too. Very nice. Let's see, Andrea, I think we've got you. I don't know if I said that right. We could get you up next. And I'll turn my mic on, and if it goes much more than 4 minutes, at about 4 minutes, I'll make some kind of a gesture to let you know to start wrapping up. And I think we're doing a pretty good job of staying about on time. So I will turn my mic off, and it's all yours, Andrea.
Were for living environment class, so students would be in 9th grade in my school. Some other schools do it in 10th, but usually it's either 9th or 10th grade students. And it's a part of the heredity unit. So students in the lab are going to be using model organisms or dragons, and they're going to create chromosomes, cross their dragons, to observe the genotypic and phenotypic outcomes of their crosses. So it's really important that I stress to them that they're modeling the work of scientists before them, like Gregor Mendel. He used peas as a model organism, so they would be using a model organism just like real scientists. This would take place probably on the 2nd day of the unit, and students would already be introduced to key genetic terms like allele, genotype, phenotype, things like that, and they would already have completed molecular genetics and sexual reproduction.